In 1908, Ireland's greatest revolutionary and an immigrant, James Connolly, said, "Let no Irishman throw a stone at a foreigner lest he hit his own clansman." And that is as good a summary of the reasons why thousands of people will take to the streets of Dublin this weekend, and dozens of organisations, trade unionists, community activists, anti-racist activists, housing campaigners, anti-poverty campaigners, community organisations, because they, like James Connolly, understand that if we are going to address the very, very real problems that face our society in the form of a dire housing crisis, the desperate situation in our public health services, particularly our health service, deal with the cost of living crisis, we need unity and solidarity, and that those that preach hate and division and that seek to scapegoat foreigners or migrants or asylum seekers are the enemy of the movement that is fighting to actually address the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, the crisis in our public services. Connolly understood that. When he was speaking, he was saying, we need solidarity. Don't throw the stones at the people you need to stand beside you to fight, to deal with poverty and the housing crisis and all the problems that working class people face. He was pointing out explicitly that we are a country made up of wave after wave of immigration. He was pointing out that the Irish in England, in the United States, were the subject to precisely the same racist stereotyping that the far right are now directing towards asylum seekers. The Irish were described as criminals. They were described as a danger to women. They were described as violent and drunken and illegal and targeted by the far right as part of a strategy, often by the establishment in those countries, to deflect away from the very real problems that existed in those countries. So we're saying on Saturday, don't fall for the poison and tricks of the far right that seek to deflect people away from the real struggle that needs to happen, which is a struggle of unity and solidarity of working people to demand that this government addresses the housing and accommodation crisis, to solve the crisis in our public health service, to solve the crisis of the cost of living and the poverty that many communities suffer. But I will say, you see, when the Taoiseach says, oh, the left or those who are protesting shouldn't try and point the finger at us and we're not responsible for these things, you see, the truth is that time and time again, the government has prioritised the interests of vulture funds, of corporate landlords, of profiteering energy companies, of those who have got very rich, while other people are suffering the trauma and misery of the housing crisis and the cost of living crisis. And of course, that builds anger and fury. And that creates the conditions where the far right can turn that anger against innocent asylum seekers and migrants. So, we might all say, and rightly so, we must reject racism, we must stand up to the poison of the far right, but it would make it a hell of a lot easier if this government, for example, stopped allowing people to be evicted into homelessness, started to deal with the land speculators and the land hoarders who sit on vacant properties, on land and so on, speculating it, making a fortune out of the misery that other people are suffering. If they stood up to the profiteering energy companies that are making obscene profits on the back of the cost of living misery that huge numbers of people are suffering. So we make no apologies in saying we will be out on Saturday in our thousands, to say no to racism, no to scapegoating refugees and asylum seekers, to stand in solidarity with them, but also to say the government must own up to their responsibility and failure to address the housing misery that people are suffering in this country and the cost of living crisis that they have failed to address.
Thank you.